Hi, I'm Mary Perry, and this is my podcast, Ripples, episode 12.
Excellent. Welcome aboard, Mary.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great. It's the middle of the day here. I'm assuming that means it's the middle
We
of the night
were just
where you
talking
are.
before we started recording that Greg and I don't actually know a terribly great deal about you, but when someone like Aaron Francis floats your name to our list of guests, then it's certainly someone that we want to take notice of. And so we're excited to have you here and have this as like a genuinely getting to know you kind of episode. So for those like us out in the community who don't know who you are, Mary, did you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you sort of ended up on Aaron's radar?
Um, I have been a hobbyist programmer for, I guess, 13 or 14 years now. And um, I went through some changes in my life. I started programming a lot more seriously and daily after I was divorced, and I ended up getting a job doing Python, which is my main language. But I was also working on a Drupal site. So I had to learn PHP, and that was very challenging for me. I couldn't really wrap my head around Drupal, but I'd used Flask before. So I wanted to learn Laravel because it had the MVC setup. Um, and I thought that it would be more familiar. So I went down to Laracon. Um, I did not know anyone there. Um, it was very overwhelming. Um, it was exciting because I
Hmm.
really do love Laravel. And the talks were incredible, and I got to meet really wonderful people. I got to pitch an app to Matt Stauffer. I met Susanna from Laravel's, and then the imposter syndrome started getting really bad towards the end. And then wrapping up with publish your work increases your luck. Really made me feel like I could do it. I felt like he was
Hmm.
talking directly to me. I know that a lot of people probably had that reaction. I definitely teared up. I saw other people tearing up as well. Um, and Zuzana was kind enough to introduce me after the presentation, and I told him a little bit about the app that I was working on, and we followed up on a Zoom call and some Twitter messages, and I've become an avid, mostly technical fan. So I think that sums up a lot.
Excellent. That is interesting. So how long have you been working with Laravel then?
Oh, less than 2 years, I would
Okay.
say. Yeah.
So somewhere around the middle to late part of 2022 was when you sort of picked up Laravel, and then you just decided, I'm going to go to Laracon in where was it last year? Nashville, and
Nashville, yeah.
yeah, just not knowing anyone, just kind of sussing out the vibe as someone very new to the community, very new to the framework, and being there on your own, and you've come away with a new perspective on the framework. You made some friends. Matt Stauffer, let me say, is probably one of the kindest, warmest, friendliest people, and he's always going to be out looking for people that are new, and he will take them under his wing and look after them. And I've known that for the better part of 10 years now, probably a little bit longer. So you've definitely found the right people. But it's nice to hear that. Um, even as someone who has never been involved in the community, kind of an outside observer, we heard this with Jess as well. Just turn up to the conference and find that, it's not as scary as you think it is in your head in the lead up. So, what was the kind of app that you pitched, I suppose, to Matt? Is it something, because you've been doing some live streams and things like that?
Yes, but the live streams have been just trying to get used to being in front of a camera. They
Hmm.
are, it's very difficult to remember any code and also talk and live stream for me. So they've been like very beginner level topics.
Hmm.
The app that I was working on, I called it Retier. I was working with a volunteering organization that housed refugees in the first
Okay.
90 days in the country.
Hmm.
And a lot of the people who worked there were also retired. So it was kind of like a pun I don't know. The idea was to try and make kind of a glorified to-do app that would track all re- the things that were required for a family to move into a house, the tasks that the volunteers needed to do. The employees had a different set of tasks, so there's a little bit of role and scope and authorization going on. And The organization that I was working with specifically needed Google Drive to be involved.
Mhm,
Um, so a lot of what happened was I was trying to negotiate around Google Drive, and Matt helped me with the actual coding and the design, which was very generous of him. And I kept voicing concerns that he and some other people who were helping me had about the Google Drive. And eventually it got to the point where I had to stop working with that organization. But I was so loud about it that I recently got a award and a certificate from them because when I left, they escalated the problem and resources were allocated from the organization to IT that might not have happened if I hadn't been able to convey that knowledge to them. So it was kind of a
mhm.
success, and I'd like to go back and revisit it with a more appropriate testing group.
Nice. Yeah, Google Drive is certainly gnarly if you've had to work
Mm,
with it in any capacity, especially with all of the access controls and things that they have in place for it. Even just getting access to a set of credentials that work have been troubling, even for someone like I've run into the issue as well. So it's not just a beginner problem.
Yeah, I was overconfident because I had used a lot of Google Scripts um, programming and automation with Python,
Mhm.
but it turned out to be a completely different beast with Laravel.
Yeah, yeah. It's easy, but it's also difficult if you don't have access to the correct things, I suppose. So, Mary, you said that you had been a hobbyist programmer for 13 years prior to sort of taking this more of a, I guess, primary focus for yourself. What what was kind of, I guess, the impetus behind doing it on the side, and then what sort of drew you towards doing it as a full time focus? And I suppose has that helped being something that you've enjoyed doing on the side to then making it your full time kind of passion project?
Well, I was worried that if I ever got a job programming, that it would take the fun out of it and the passion out of it. So even though it was my
Mhm,
favorite thing to do, I didn't want to make it my focus. And I've always viewed programming
mhm,
as a type of literacy rather than a skill in and of itself. I think that's something that I see and hear about a lot in the Laravel community. That the products that are being made are not being made for the sake of engineering. They're useful for additional contexts as well.
mhm.
Um, when I was in school, I was an economics major, and I took some programming classes, but I ended up not finishing school. I um, I think that I missed out on a lot of courses that I would have really liked to take, which is why I've been going through design patterns so deeply. I've been looking through the Laravel source code and trying to learn
Mhm,
it and recognize design patterns at the same time. So I think that it's interesting to be able to approach a standard course or a standard textbook. I'm using the Gang of Four textbook with a different context and trying to find your own resources instead of being able to rely on a professor or a coach at a job or something like that. Being able to reach out to people who might know about a specific topic and really apply learning directly. I think it really helps. I also really love breaking things. Um, and when I have a lot of time and I don't have to follow somebody else's structure, I can break a
mhm.
program in like
Yeah, I think
50,
the
100
the
different ways until I really
self-directed
understand
for
how
a
it
lot of
works. So,
people is a lot more useful, especially when you get to choose and you can pull on some threads, see where the path leads you. Whereas when it's a structured course or a structured learning, like I did a semester of computer science, and it's just that it didn't work for me. And I think it doesn't work for a lot of us. And lots of us are um self self-taught programmers, and we've forged careers in it. I've been almost 20 years as a software developer because I was interested in it, and came out on the other side and just happened to keep plucking away at it until I got good at it. And there are still some days where those of us that have been around for a while feel as though we don't know what we're doing. Something doesn't go our way, or something that should be simple ends up being hours of debugging or chasing our tails around. So it's certainly the common approach, and especially with all of the resources that we have available now. We're not being force fed Java in university or college, where we've got Laracast, or we've got people like Aaron Francis, or especially in the Laravel community, untold number of content creators and educators and people just sharing what they're learning. So it makes it really a great time for us to pick up and do our self-directed learning, and end up in positions like yourself, where it's now, oh, actually the fear of turning this thing that I love as a hobby into a job, soiling it for me, is has really not eventuated, which is, I think now is a really good time for anyone to sort of pick that up, because it is and can be an enjoyable thing. And so many of us, spouses, you hear the stories of spouses going, "What are you doing on the computer still? Work finished hours ago." It's like, well, yeah, but I still enjoy what I'm doing. This is my hobby and it is my job.
Yeah, getting paid to do a thing you love is like that's the
I
that's
think
the meal
there's
ticket,
been
right? Like there's so many other people out there who
Yeah.
hate the thing that they get paid to do, but we're lucky enough that we just get to play with solving puzzles all the time.
I think that there's been a bit of a debate about should they teach Git in college, and it's made me really think. I think it's a false choice. The whole, do you have a computer science degree or do you not have a computer science degree? Are you self taught? Did you go to a boot camp? Because ultimately, I think that every software engineer or developer that I've met has been successful because they self teach no matter what environment you happen to be in when you're doing it. I heard recently that there's going to be more computer science graduates than there are jobs available. Um, and I think that people who are successful will be able to differentiate themselves by
Yeah,
really
100%.
being
Yeah.
able to
Yeah,
learn
I
how to
agree with that.
learn
Yeah,
and
I
learn by
mean,
themselves.
I'm I manage a team of people, and the people who succeed are the people who are constantly learning. Like I think some people, not certainly not everyone. There are definitely people who come out of the university system who do continue to learn, but there's some people who kind of get their ticket and they think that that's where it stops, and the reality is that that's where it starts. My view on
Mhm.
college and university is that it kind of really just gives you a leg up on the tools you need to learn how to learn, as opposed to, because the curriculums just can't keep up. They honestly can't. I doubt there are university degrees out there that are like on the sort of cutting edge of what's happening with generative AI and all that kind of stuff, because it's all happening so quickly. But the people who are successful are the people who are picking that up and doing really, really neat and interesting things with that. So yeah, I think you're completely right that however you get there, as long as you are a person who, and I think you tweeted you tweeted last night my time, this sort of knowing things is good, but you've got to respect people who can willpower something into existence. And I think that is. And that's really like a view on learning, right? It's like I have no idea how to solve this problem, but I know that if I grit it out, if I push hard enough, then nothing is beyond me. It's just going to take some time, and it's just going to take getting knocked a handful of times. And um, uh, I think that's the people who are successful are the people who carry that kind of attitude.
Yeah, I think um, structured learning, as you say,
Completely
that
agree.
they can only teach so much. They can't be changing their courses every semester, because there's not going to be enough continuity in the teaching in those structured environments from semester to semester if they're changing everything to keep up with whatever's current. Um, you know, PHP has basically been PHP for a long time, but in more um, in demand kind of things, I suppose. In the JavaScript ecosystem, things change rapidly because they're still, um, I don't want to say in their infancy, but they're still trying to figure out how they want to get from where they are to where they need to be. And, there are people out there at the moment, like Ryan Florence, talking about bridging the gap between the back end and the front end so that people can rightly or wrongly, doesn't matter, but have one language that spans the back end and the front end. And so they're trying, they're approaching things in a different way to what we are in the PHP ecosystem. So, um, being able to understand how to learn and how to kind of do things is probably more critical in those settings. Teaching the foundational things, teaching people how to learn, um, and find the answers to the problems, because not there are patterns and structures and things like that we can learn. You said you're reading I've never read a Gang of Four book. I've never read any of the blue book or the red book or any of that kind of stuff. I know they exist, but everything that I've done has been through experience, whether that's good or bad, finding out the hard way, coming around, years later and going, oh, if I had known this data structure or this design pattern or whatever, this thing that I did years ago might have been easier. But the key is, like, especially for many business, all of the businesses I've been, some of the code bases that I've come into, it's like there's nothing structured about this, there's nothing designed about this, but it is delivering value. And so there's also that fine line you find in the quote unquote real world, that are you achieving outcomes? And I think that is probably the key thing in a lot of scenarios, that people, if you're coming out of college or whatever, may not necessarily understand that all the design patterns or all the structures, but do you know how to apply that in a way that is going to achieve outcomes for the place that you're working? So there is definitely different ways of thinking about that out here, outside of the college bubble, I suppose.
One of the things that I've liked a lot about trying to learn design patterns with Laravel code is that Laravel developers
Hmm.
Laravel developers all know the design patterns because they've used them before. And there's this intuitive sense that I've gotten from just looking at code and being able to extend like the framework when it's generated with Laravel new. Um, I think design patterns are useful because they give a quick
Hmm.
convention to communicate, like a name that you can communicate this idea. And in a lot of senses, I think that when Laravel developers talk about Socialite or the Eloquent Builder or
Hmm.
any of those things, it's a different way of saying a very similar idea. I saw a interview recently with Uncle Bob
Yep.
on by Primagian. I can't really pronounce it correctly. Um, and he was talking about the design patterns and talking about how it's written in Smalltalk,
Hmm.
which actually looks to me a lot like PHP more than other languages. But he says that since Smalltalk is so gestural and the syntax is so minimal, then you can express a lot of semantics. And I think that the semantic
Hmm.
idea is what you can't get in class. You can't get it from other people. You have to have your own sense of self learning to have it. And then you have to have some kind of community or
Hmm.
some kind of language enabled in order to be able to express it, which is what I think is so amazing about Laravel, because there's so many ideas that can
Hmm.
go so quickly between people. And it's not written down in a textbook or taught in a class. It's a really vibrant living organism.
Yeah. I think sticking to the conventions as well, you kind of find your way into design patterns, even if you don't know what they are. They're like, there's manager patterns and there's factory patterns and there's all of this stuff that just exists in Laravel. And if you're following the conventions of the framework, you are inherently using those things. And it may not be until 6 months, 2 years, whatever later, that you find out that there's actually a name for that, because you saw it at a conference talk or you heard someone talk about that in a YouTube video or something like that. So it's you're using those things even if you don't necessarily know that you are.
I think you're also completely like dead right that it's about giving a name to things. It has been a very, very long time since I've read the Gang of Four book, but I seem to recall that the main sort of thrust of it is that it's about identifying common things that already exist and putting a name on it. And I think a lot of people who get really bogged down in the sort of patterns and practices worldview is that they first internalize what the patterns are, then try and find all the places to implement to to use them. Where really that they're, I mean, everything we do is about communicating, and there's that sort of famous quote that code is designed for communication between humans and only incidentally to be executed by computers. And giving names to these, like, sometimes relatively complex relatively complex concepts. Like, I mean, a builder pattern is not necessarily a simple thing. A strategy pattern is not necessarily a simple thing. But you can give, if you identify the shape of these things, you can then put a name on it, and then we can talk. Like, I sort of say, hey, we should use a chain of command in this particular space, and you will just know, like, what I'm talking about without me having to sit there and talk about all of the specific bits and pieces that go into it. Which, yeah, I think that's like a pretty accurate way of looking at it.
And I think trying to implement them when, the design pattern is the hammer and it just like works for everything. I think it's natural to go through a period where you write some pretty terrible code, but that can be avoided, I
Yeah.
think, with the communication perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the communication. There's always, like, I always fall back to known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. There are just some things that you don't know that you don't know, and so you end up just doing stuff to achieve some outcome because you don't know that there's another way of doing it as well. So, yeah, I think conventional Laravel definitely takes you a long, long way, and there are breaking points. There are places where some things don't necessarily work at a certain scale, and you end up doing modular monoliths or something like this, where you're still kind of following the things, but you're breaking them up in a little bit more um, granular, a more granular way. So um, yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear that, and certainly I think a common thing that loads of people are just finding their way in the world, because it's, like I said earlier on, it's easier than ever to get started with this stuff, and the things, especially now, that Laravel are trying to achieve in terms of making the onboarding experience as easy as possible. We've got the Laravel Bootcamp, we've got Laravel Herd now that makes it really ridiculously simple to start building apps from the get go, on Windows and Mac. You don't have to worry about configuring things or installing things or whatever. You just Laravel new and off you go. So I think we're in a really good place now, and I think it's going to get even better in the next 12 months or so, as Laravel really tries to zero in on that onboarding and deployment experience. One other thing that I wanted to touch on, as we're getting close to time here, is you've been doing some teaching in last year. I went through your older post, and you were doing a coding overview class at your local library. So it's not just the passion you have at the moment for learning yourself, but also sharing that experience, which we have spoken about time and again on this episode. That when you are learning the thing is when you are most in tune with being able to teach it to people in a similar space, which is something that often precludes people, makes them think that they're not qualified to teach things. Do you want to share a little bit about what that's been like for you?
Yeah, I really love the idea of breaking down language and coding as a language. So I use the strategy of trying to be able to repeat and teach what I'm learning while I'm learning as one of my primary like learning skills. Um, when I was growing up, there was a woman uh, in my neighborhood who was a database programmer, and she always told me that I would be great at it. And when I got to college, I never really questioned whether or not I could do it. I just did it as a hobby and continued to do it because she had just shown up and told me about it and kept repeating, you're going to be great at it. I think that visibility for that and just showing up and telling people that they can and that it's fun and that it's just possible is really important. I think Aaron Francis does that a lot.
Hmm.
I really love the way that he does it. I love seeing um, all of the podcasts from the Laravel community, like more live streams. I love Laracasts because that's unapproachable about it. It seems like everybody who is public facing and learning or teaching in public is someone that you could have a conversation with, and they're not trying to do like a over 9,000 IQ thing. Um, I think that that's important.
Yeah, beautiful. And so I suppose the next thing, probably the thing that we'll touch on last, not this year obviously, but are we going to see you on the conference circuit at some stage? It
I
feels
hope
like the
so.
kind of thing that you will be able to, I think, as you say, breaking down that in and of itself is an incredibly um, difficult skill to master. But if you can take, programming concepts and distill them in such a way that children can understand them, I think, being able to break things down on a conference stage, getting over the anxiety and whatever else that goes with standing on stage in front of hundreds of people.
Michael's pitching to get
I
the
think it would be
2025 speaker lineup sorted out right here.
yeah. Got time. Got time. Get on the circuit. Yeah,
Well,
I think it'd be good to see at some stage. I think you've got as a conference organizer, there are just, I don't know how to explain it, but there are certain characteristics I see in people that you just sometimes they just need a little push, but once they get out there, it's on them. But I think you've got that. Whatever it is, I think you've certainly got it, Mary.
thank you. And the episodes that I've seen with Rissa and Jess Archer really gave me a lot of context to be putting the talks together that I am now. So
Mhm.
I'm hoping that they're successful.
Yes, and so you're pitching these. You said before we started recording to the local meetups. I know that Joe Tannenbaum has kicked off this PHPX, this thing that's going on. So you've got a couple lined up in the coming months.
Yes, there's one on factory patterns and one that is an overview based on 8 design patterns that every programmer should know, but it's expanded to 10 because it's more applicable to Laravel code. So
Excellent, cool.
Awesome.
Well, I hope that all goes well for you. Hope
thank
we
you.
get to see that at some stage, and certainly we'll be keeping an eye out in the future for your grand Laracon debut.
Fingers crossed.
So, for everyone who doesn't already have you followed, where can people find you if they want to learn a bit more about what you're up to and follow your streaming and social media escapades?
Well, I'm pretty much just on the website formerly known as Twitter now. But I will be streaming again soon. I had to take a couple weeks that turned into a couple months of break, but I will be back.
Amazing. And so your x.com / is it Cyphrius? Is that how you say it?
Yes, at Cyphrius.
Excellent. We will have links to that in the show notes for everyone.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we're at time there or thereabouts. So thanks for coming on, Mary. It's been really interesting to sort of mostly sit back and, due to technical issues, just listen to listen to your story. It's always good to find people who aren't the sort of usual suspects in the Laravel community and speak to them. Really excited to see where your design pattern talks go. And I'll sort of echo Michael's sentiment in saying that I think that it'd be really exciting to see you on the Laracon circuit. Consider for 2025. Consider the best Laracon in the world, which is the one in Australia. We're the only one. We're the only one that you can find a koala. It's the only one.
It's a complete
So yeah, if anyone else out there would love to jump on and have a go at hijacking the podcast for an episode, you can find me at Craig Scarman on Twitter or at Michael Dorinda for Michael's Twitter. All the links will be in the show notes. I think we do have one or two other people lined up, do we, Michael? Or am I misremembering that?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. But yeah, until next episode, I've been Greg.
I have been Michael.
And I'm always Mary.
See you all next time.
Bye.